Today's daf is Chulin daf tzadi, and we are 13 lines from the bottom of daf Pei Tes Amid Beis. So at the end of yesterday's daf, we began the 7th parak of Masechtas Chulin, Perek Gid Hanasha, which deals primarily with the halachos of the Gid Hanasha. So the third mitzvah in the Torah, according to the Chinuch's Minyan HaMitzvahs, is Shaloi Lechol Gid Hanasha. And the origin of the Loisase Gid Hanasha goes way back. It predates Maimon Har Sinai. In fact, it's mentioned in Sefer Bereshis, Parshas Vayishlach. It was an Isser that went into effect because of a Maisa Shehoya Kachoya, a story that the Gemara is going to discuss in great detail in the coming dafin. Tomorrow's daf, the following daf, is going to have a lot of Agadata, which is going to darshan some of the psukim that we're quite familiar with in Parshas Vayishlach. But from a high level, Yaakov Avinu gets into a fight, a struggle with a malach. Chazal say the malach was none other than Sarei Shalesa, Vayarki Lo Yochaloi, and the malach was struggling to try to defeat Yaakov Avinu. Vayiga Bekaf Yerechoi. So what it did is it hit Yaakov Bekaf Yerechoi. We'll see what that means. Vateka Kaf Yerech Yaakov Behei Ofka Yimai. At the very end, the pasuk says, because of what happened, and because of the fact that the malach struck Yaakov Bekaf Yerechoi, and Yaakov was injured as a result, the pasuk says, "V'hutzay leya al yorechai al kain pashit." To commemorate this event, la yoichlu b'nei Yisrael es gid hanasha. The Torah said that one is not allowed to eat the gid hanasha of the animal al kaf hayorech, which is in that area. It's in the kaf yorechai, the thigh, the femur area of the animal. Ad hayoy mazeh ki noga bekaf yerech Yaakov begid hanasha. What's interesting is the Torah did not say that because of what happened to Yaakov, you're not allowed to eat the thigh of the animal. You're allowed to eat the thigh of the animal. What the Torah says you're not allowed to eat is the gid hanasha. That's this one gid. It's known as the sciatic nerve, which is in the thigh area, if you refer to your diagram. So it's that the Torah said one is not allowed to eat, related to this Maisa that happened in Parshas Vayishlach. Again, we're going to go into detail as far as what exactly the Gid HaNasha is. We're going to go into detail to understand the context a little bit better as it relates to Parshas Vayishlach. But for now, we have more of a Lamdish daf, a daf that is going to discuss primarily a more abstract detail of the laws of Gid HaNasha, and that is, the Mishnah said that Gid HaNasha is noyeg bechulin ubemukdashim. The laws of Gid HaNasha relate to an animal that's chulin. It also relates to an animal that's kachim. And the Gemara asks pshita, meaning at first glance it sounds like if you have an animal that's chulin, you shecht it, of course there's going to be an issa Gid HaNasha. What happens if you makdish this animal? Now it's hektish, so it's a carbon shlamim. So you shecht the carbon shlamim, so part of the shlamim, the chalavim, those are parts you're not allowed to eat anyways, go on the mizbeach. The rest of it gets distributed amongst the kayanim and amongst the balabatim of this carbon shlamim. Says the Mishnah that just like when the behemoth was chulin, there was an issa Gid HaNasha. So too, now that it's kashim, there's going to be an issa Gid HaNasha as well. The Gemara says, why would you think otherwise? Mishum da'aktish pakale issa Gid minei. Why would you think that because now it's hektish, there suddenly shouldn't be an issa Gid HaNasha? And the Gemara had two immediate failed attempts to try to understand Pashup Shan in the Mishnah, and from here, really, the first quarter or so of the daf, the Gemara is going to try to figure out exactly what the Mishnah means. What's the chiddush of the Mishnah when it says that Gid HaNasha is noyeg b'mukdashim? Says the Gemara, Elahacha b'vladeis kacham askinam. We're talking about not an animal that was born chulin and then afterwards its owner made it hektish, but rather we're discussing an animal that was born already hektish. Now, before we even explain that, says the Gemara V'Kasava, we're going according to the opinion of Noyeg Bishlo, that the Issa Gid HaNasha applies to a fetus, just as it applies to a fully born animal. We saw in the Mishnah, it's a machlekes, Rabbi Yehuda and the Tanakama, whether there's an Issa Gid HaNasha in a fetus or not. In other words, if you shecht an animal and you find a live animal inside, there's a ben pekua. So do the laws of Gid HaNasha relate to the ben pekua? The ben pekua has its own shulchan aruch. It doesn't require shchita. There's machlekes in the Gemara whether there's an Issa chelev. So how about Gid HaNasha? Does Gid HaNasha relate to a fetus or not? Says the Mishnah, it's a machlekes Tanah. This pshat in the first part of the Mishnah that says Gid HaNasha is noyeh b'mukdashim is going to be discussing a v'ladeis kachim. It's going to be going according to the Manama that holds that the laws of Gid HaNasha relate to a fetus. Because Savar and another akimta they have to make just to understand that one word in the Mishnah u'b'mukdashim is you have to say v'ladeis kachim b'mei iman hinkdashim, that an animal that gives birth to another animal that's hektish, so the baby is hektish, and its kedusha is already chal b'mei iman. And as we'll see later in the sugya, not everybody holds that way. But for now, kosavar vlodes kachim b'me'ima in henkdashim. So what did we accomplish by doing all this? The iser gid v'iser mukdashim b'hadei adadi ka'asi. Being that we're discussing vlad hektish, so the case is where the iser gid hanosha and the iser hektish were both chal b'vasachas. Meaning at the same time that the animal got its iser gid hanosha, it also got its iser hektish. And at the same time that it got its iser hektish, it got its iser gid hanosha. And that's the chiddush of the Mishnah, that gid hanosha is noyeh b'mukdashim. Meaning, enochinami, if you had a animal that's already a year old, and now someone goes ahead and he's makdish it, it's pashut that there's going to be an iser gid hanosha. I don't need the Mishnah to tell me that. Now, what was the Gemara's kasha? Mukdashim pshita. Why is it pashut? Mishum da'akdish she'pakalei iser gid minei. You're right. The Mishnah is not talking about a case where it was chulin, then you were makdish it, and kamash malon, that even though you were makdish it, still the animal retains its iser gid hanosha. There's no havamina to think otherwise. But rather, what the Mishnah is talking about is where the animal was born already with in the state of hektish, so that the iser gid hanosha and the iser hektish both came about at the same time. If they both came about at the same time, maybe there would have been a havamina that the iser gid hanosha is not going to be chal b'vasachas together with the iser hektish. If the iser gid hanosha was there before the hektish, of course it's going to retain its iser gid hanosha after you were makdish it. But if there was no before, because everything happened simultaneously, in that case, maybe you would think the iser gid hanosha was never chal. Kamash malon, that it was chal. Now, one other thing that's important, if you want to really understand this Gemara, and that is that anytime you talk about something having two isurim, you have to get involved in the sugya of iser chal al iser. And this is a sugya arucha, which encompasses literally the entire shas, and that is iser chal al iser, ein iser chal al iser, and even the manama that holds that ein iser chal al iser, there's something called iser moisef, iser kol. So the point is anytime you're discussing something that has two isurim, you have to look at it in the context of iser chal al iser. Now, this seems to be a classic example of iser chal al iser. You have a gid. This gid, you're daning to isurim. Number one, the gid is asur b'achila because it's hektish. You're not allowed to eat hektish. And number two, this gid is asur b'achila because it's the gid hanosha. And as a result, the gid hanosha is something that's always asur b'achila. But pashit, in this beer in the Gemara, it's not going to be a kasha. How could the Mishnah say Gid Hanosha is noyeh b'mukdashim, and that you can have an Isser Gid Hanosha and an Isser Hektish? Because being that they're both Chal b'vasachas, one of the exceptions to the rule of when you do say Isser Chal al Isser is vasachas. So if the two Isurim are Chal b'vasachas, not an Isser Chal al Isser. What's an Isser Chal al Isser? One Isser, and then the other one wants to be Chal on top of that Isser. In this case, where they're both Chal b'vasachas, that in and of itself won't be an issue. But the point is that when the Mishnah said Gid Hanosha is noyeh b'mukdashim, it's not talking about an animal that was born Chulin and later became hektish, but rather we're talking about an animal that was born hektish, and being that it was born hektish, the kedushas hektish was already chal b'meiman. The iser gid hanosha is also chal b'meiman. It was vasachas. There's no problem with iser chal al iser. And the chiddush is that b'vas achas the iser gid hanosha is going to be chal. But the Gemara says, how could you tell me the Mishnah is talking about a fetus? The Sefer the Mishnah discusses what happens if you have a fetus, like a ben pakua. Is there an iser gid hanosha on a fetus or not? So it sounds like that's the Sefer of the Mishnah. It doesn't sound like the Reish Mishnah is not discussing the shul. Gemara says, no, hachi kamar. This teretz, the way you read the Mishnah is that when the Mishnah says b'mukid hanosh is not b'mukdashim, it's already discussing a shlil. Zok the Mishnah. By the way, as it relates to saying that there's an isagid hanosh b'shlil, it's really totally in a machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim, and that's the hemshech of the Mishnah. So you're right. When the Mishnah mentions shlil, when you read the Mishnah the first time, it sounds like now we're going to discuss something that hasn't been discussed yet in the Mishnah. In light of this beer of the Gemara, that's really a hemshech to what the Gemara already said. But the Gemara says, is it possible to say that the Issa Hektish and the Issa Gedanosha are Chal b'vasachas? Again, why did we need the two to be Chal b'vasachas? Because you can't have the Gedanosha be Chal before the Issa Hektish. Because then pshita, then what's the chiddush of the Mishnah? That once you makdish it, you still have the Isser Gid Hanosha. And you can't say this hektish is chal before the Isser Gid Hanosha, because then l'churi you'll have a problem of ein Isser chal al Isser. So really what you need in order to make the teretz of the Gemara work is to say they were both chal b'vasachas. But the Gemara says, not true. But time we learned to the Mishnah, leilu tumois hanos megaleach. So we know a nazir, one of his isur mar is not allowed to be metama to a mace. What happens if a nazir is metama to a mace? It soiser his naziros. It knocks out his entire naziros. So if somebody was makabel estam naziros, which is 30 days, and now he's holding a day 27, he goes to a beis hakfaris, he comes in contact to a mace, he has to start all over again. All the days he counted get knocked out, and he has to be tamei for 7 days, he brings karbanis, and then afterwards he starts all over again. So says the Mishnah, al elu tumois hanazar megalech. The following tumas can cause a nazar to have to start all over again, meaning do his taglachas and start from scratch. Al hameis, if he comes in contact with a mace, val kazayis from a mace, or he comes in contact with a kazayis from a mace. And Chazal asked the obvious question on this Mishnah. Al kazayis from a mace megalech. If the Mishnah says that a nazar is megalech when he comes in contact with a kazayis of a mace, then obviously he has to be megalech if he comes in contact with an entire mace. No, you know what the chiddush of mace is? It's talking about a mace that had no kazayis min mace. What does kazayis min mace mean? A kazayis of basar. It's possible to have a mace and there not be a kazayis basar yet. A nefel that's so early term, and that stage of the fetus's life, it doesn't have a kazayis basar yet. It's still considered a nefel, but at the same time, being that there is no kazayis basar, there's no ivarim, there's no gidim, therefore you would have thought that maybe it's not matama. Says the Mishnah, a nazir is megalech if he comes in contact with a kazayis basar and a mace, or if he comes in contact with a nefel, meaning a mace that doesn't have a kazayis basar. But what you see from here is that the nefel is considered a nefel, the fetus is considered a fetus even before it has a kazayis basar, even before it's niksharu evara begidim. What we need is even before it has a gidanasha, it's still considered a mace. Alma. So what do you see? Is muktashim kadim. So you see, l'chura, if you want to translate that into asugya, that the isa hektish on the nefel should be chal before the isa gedanash. Isa hektish would be chal as soon as it's a fetus. So if the nas is megalech when it comes in contact with this fetus, even though it doesn't have a gid yet, then l'chura the isa hektish should also be chal. Now there's not going to be an isa gedanash until there's a gid. So you see, hektish is chal before the gid. If hektish is chal before the gid, then even if you'll be making the mishnah that it's a shlil, l'chura, how could you have gedanasha on a shlil of hektish? You have a problem that the hektish was chal first, and as a result, ein iser chalal iser, says the Gemara, afagav the iser mukdashim kadim. You're right. You have to say that the iser hektish is going to be chal before the iser gedanasha. If that's the case, how could the Mishnah be talking about that? How could there be gedanasha if first there was an iser hektish? What happened to an iser chalal iser? So the Gemara says the reason there's no problem with iser chal is not because the chal b'vasachas. That's what we thought till now. They're not chal b'vasachas, but asi it gid, asi iser gid chal olayish ken iser noyeg b'bnei noyach. It's for a different reason, and the reason is because gedanasha has a chumrah. It's noyeg b'bnei noyach. Now the truth is, the ben noyach is not aser to eat the gedanasha. In fact, the Torah is very clear. It says in the Torah, "Al kain lo yoichlu b'nei Yisrael." It's gedanasha. Couldn't be more clear. It's dafka b'nei Yisrael. What it means is that it's mentioned in Parshas Vayishlach, in the Parshas of Bnei Noach. It was said to Yaakov Avinu when he was a Ben Noach. But the point is shekain isura noyeg bivnei noyach, and as a result, that's a chumrah. Thus, even though ordinarily ein isachal aliser, this is another exception to the rule. So usually ein isachal aliser, but there's something called isam ma'asav, something called isam koil, something called isam b'vasachas, and there's something called if isura is noyeg bivnei noyach. That's the reason that it should be chal. So in other words, the same teretz. The teretz is we're talking about a fetus that was already born hektish. In that case, the Isser Gidanasha was not chal before the Isser Hektish. Thus, there would have been a havamina that maybe there is no Isser Gidanasha. Kamash one, there is an Isser Gidanasha. The problem is, how's the Isser Gidanasha chal? Isn't there an issue of an Isser chal al Isser? Says the Gemara, no, because Gidanasha is one of those Isurim that somehow transcend the laws of Issachal al Isser. It has a special chumrah. Why would it have a special chumrah? Shekeni Yisurei Noyag B'Biner. But the Gemara says, Man Shamlei Haisfar, who's the one that holds that the Isser of Gid Hanasha could be Chal on another Isser, Shekeni Yisurei B'Nei Noyach? It happens to be Rabbi Yehuda Shita. V'Masi isn't like Rabbi Yehuda. We know for a fact our Mishnah is like Rabbi Yehuda. Tani, the Mishnah said, Noyag B'Behema B'Chai B'Yerech Shal Yeminu B'Yerech Shal Sma. The Mishnah said that the laws of Gid Hanasha relate to the right thigh of the animal, the left thigh of the animal. And we know that Rabbi Yehuda Shita is, we know this already from previous dafin, and we're going to see it on Amud Beis in detail. Rabbi Yehuda Shita is that you don't have the Issa Gid Hanasha on both thighs. Was Rabbi Yehuda Mesupik which thigh? Did he know which thigh? That's a whole discussion in the Gemara. But Rabbi Yehuda certainly does not hold Yerech Shal Yeminu V'Yerech Shal Shmai, which means the time of the Mishnah is shown on Rabbi Yehuda. So how could you excuse Rabbi Yehuda Shita that this is a Chalal Isser by the Gid Hanasha Shekeni Yisurei Noyeg B'Menayach to explain the Stam Mishnah of Mukdashim? The Stam Mishnah is not Rabbi Yehuda, because the Stam Mishnah also says that Gid Hanasha is Noyeg both Yerechos, and Rabbi Yehuda Shita is that it's not Noyeg both Yerechos. Says the Gemara. What's the obvious answer? The Mishnah is not Rabbi Yehuda. and it's not Rabbi Yehuda. It's somebody else. Hai Tana, it's the Tana. Let's say Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, Rabbi. He holds like Rabbi Yehuda as it relates to Issachar. So he does not hold like Rabbi Yehuda as it relates to which thigh is going to have the Isser of Gid Ha Nashim. The Gemara asks one final question on this pshat in the Gemara, and that is named the Shamalei Rabbi Yehuda B'Tmeya. The Isser Lav Kachim the Isser Karis Mishamet Le. It's true there's a shittas Rabbi Yehuda that holds Issachar Isser by Gid Hanasha, because it has a chumrah shekedi yisuri noyeh b'benoyach. But the context in which Rabbi Yehuda said is chiddush, which is something that we'll see in later dafin, was with regards to Issa Gid Hanasha being chal on a regular loisaseh. So on a regular loisaseh, even though ein is a chal alisa, it could be chal. But here we're not discussing a regular loisaseh. We're discussing Issa hektish. Issa hektish involves karis, tumas, mikdash, v'kadash. Right? So here you're dealing with real halachos. We're dealing with Issa karis. So being that we're dealing with Issa karis, maybe you don't apply Rabbi Yehuda's shita of Shekeni Surei Noyach B'nei Noyach and say Issa Chalisa and Issa Karis. It's already a leap to take that Rabbi Yehuda and apply it over here, because Rabbi Yehuda only said it when the Issa is being Chalon and Issa Kal, an ordinary Issa. He never said it with regards to an Issa Karis. And the Gemara is so persuaded with our question, and the Gemara says we have no choice, but we have to fall off about what we just said. Again, we're trying to explain the Mishnah that says Gidan Noshah is Noyach B'N Mukdash. The Kash is Mustachiddish. Why would you think if you makdish an animal that it should lose its Issa Gidan Noshah? The teretz of the Gemara is we're talking about where you weren't makdish the animal. The animal was already born hektish. Oh, it was born hektish. So maybe the Isser Gid Anosh is not chal on this animal that's hektish. Kamash Mulan it is. But the Gemara said if it was born hektish, the Isser hektish is chal before the Isser Gid Anosh. How do I know that? Because you see that there's a stage in the fetus's life where it's viewed as a life. A nazir is not allowed to come in contact with it, for example. And if he does, it's Soiseris Naziris. But yet, it doesn't have any Gidin yet. It doesn't have a Kazayas Basar even. So you see that the Isser hektish is chal before the Isser Gid Anosh. So how could the Isser Gid Anosh then be chal? How could that be the pshat in the Mishnah? There is no Isser Gid Anosh in that case, because of ein Isser, chal al Isser. So the first teretz the Gemara said is Isser ben Noyach is different. But the Gemara said that no, the precedence for that is Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said it regarding an ordinary Isser. This is already an Isser kares. So the Gemara gives another teretz, which should go smoothly in light of a sugi that we learned together not long ago in Perek Behema Mekashem. That is hacha b'mevakeres askinon. The berechem kadosh. What's the halacha of a mevakeres, of a animal who is giving birth to a bechar? There the halacha is that as long as the animal is inside the rechem, there's no kedusha. It's only when it's pet the rechem. It says when there's a leda, that's when it becomes kaddish. So you're right. Ordinarily, hektish is chal b'meiman, but there is an example of an animal that's hektish that's not chal until the shas leda. At the time of the leda, the isser gid hanasha is chal as well. So the Mishnah that says the gid hanasha is noyach b'mukdashim is talking about kedushas b'char, not just any hektish, but the hektish of b'char. Hektish of b'char is chal b'shas leda. Gid hanasha is also chal b'shas leda. There's no problem of isser chal alisser because they're both chal b'vasachas. There's also a chiddush because you would have thought maybe the isser gid hanasha is not chal on an animal that's also going to be hektish. And finally, a third teretz, Vlada is kachim b'aviyosin hinkdoshim. The whole kasha was predicated on the fact that being that this animal, the fetus, is already a nafel, it's considered a life on some level. You see the nozes megalech that comes in contact with it, so that means it's hektish already b'mei iman. If that's the case, how could the isser gid hanasha be chal? What happened to ein isser chal al isser? The teretz that the Gemara is going to give is that who said that just because it's a nafel, it's already chal hektish. There is a man that holds who's kosovar v'lodis kachim b'mei iman and k'dashim, but there's another man that says that the hektish is never chal until it's born. If you hold the hektish is not chal until it's born, so then there's no problem of ein isser chal isser. The hektish is chal when it's born, the gid hanasha is chal when it's born. As a result, there's not going to be this. So what's the teretz? What's the bottom line? What's the short answer? This was very long-winded, but what's the short answer? When the Mishnah says gid hanasha is noyach b'n mukdashim, what it means is we're discussing an animal that was born hektish. It was born hektish, and Kamash Malon, that even though this animal is going to have an Issa Hektish, still there's also going to be an Issa Gid Hanasha. The kasha is, doesn't the Hektish happen a little bit before the Gid Hanasha? And if that's the case, isn't there a problem of Issa Chal Issa? So for that the Gemara gave three terutzim. Either there's no Issa Chal Issa by Gid Hanasha, Shekei Nisuri Noy B'Mnech, or we're talking about Bechar, Kedushas Bechar is never Chal B'Meiman, or we're going according to Manama that says that no Hektish is ever Chal B'Meiman. Now the truth is, what about a regular animal? An animal that wasn't born Hektish, an animal that was a behemoth that somebody was makdish. Of course, when the Mishnah says Gid Hanosh is noyach b'mikdashim, it means that also. The whole reason we needed this whole discussion to come up with an Akimta for the Mishnah was to explain the Chiddush of the Mishnah. But right, just to be clear, but at the end of the day, when the Mishnah says that Gid Hanosh is noyach b'mikdashim, it means all hektish has Gid ha-nasha. Either way, Omar Reb Chia bar Yosef. Reb Chia bar Yosef said, another lamdisha idea. When the Mishnah says Gid ha-nasha is naya b'mukdashim, that's only true with regards to kachim ha-nechalim. What's kachim ha-nechalim? Asham, chata, shlamim, taida, all karbanos that are nechal. Kachim she'en nechalim, such as an oila, ein iser gid noyik behem. Over there, there's going to be no iser gid ha-nasha. That's Reb Chia bar Yosef. Reb Yochanan said, echad kachim ha-nechalim, echad kachim she'en nechalim, iser gid noyik behem. It doesn't matter if we're dealing with kachim ha-nechalim, even kachim she'en nechalim, meaning even a karban oila, the halacha is there's not going to be an iser gid. Now, first glance, it sounds like there's a machlokes. Some wrap up of a loy pligi. Kan lahal koisai, kan lahaloisai. There's really no machlokes at all. When Rabbi Yochanan said, going backwards, that the iser gid hanosha relates both to kachim and achalim and even kachim she'ein achalim, he was talking about eating it. If somebody eats the gid hanosha of an oila, he's going to get malchus, and nobody disagrees with that. Meaning, even though there's other isurim involved in somebody eating the gid hanosh of an oila, you're not allowed to eat an oila, period. So certainly not allowed to eat the gid hanosh of an oila. It's like gara from any part of the oila. Stating that, there's an issa gid hanosh, and nobody disagrees with that. So what Reb Chia bar Yosef mean when he said that lo yishanu ela b'kachim anachalim, ava b'kachim enachalim not, he meant, is there an isser to take the gid hanosh of an oila and to be makter on the mizbech? Now this is a shaila that's only negeya an oila. Why? Because ordinarily, there's very specific parts of the animal that went on the mizbeach. It was the chalavim. The gid hanosh is not part of the chalavim, so it never went on the mizbeach. So this is a moot conversation. The shayla is the oila, where the oila had a din of kulei kolol. The entire oila, besides for the skin, went on the mizbeach. So if the entire oila is going to the mizbeach, what about the gid hanosh? Just like when you eat the entire animal, you have to remove the gid hanosh. You have the same halacha when you makter the carbon oila, you have to remove it or not. No, that was Reb Chia bar Yosef's halacha, where he said that by kachim she'ein nechalim, meaning the carbon oila, there's no iser gid to be makter on the mizbeach. Oh, very good. But as it relates to the iser achil, meaning there's no machlokes. Rabbi Yochanan was talking about eating it. Rabbi Chia bar Yosef was talking about being makter it. Eating it, of course, there's an iser. Just because it's an oila doesn't mean you're allowed to eat the gid hanosha. Rabbi Chia bar Yosef was talking about being makter. Ikadamri, some say Amar Rapapa v'loy pligi, meaning same comment of Rapapa that there's, although at first glance it seems to be machlokes Rabbi Chia bar Yosef, Rabbi Yochanan, really there's no machlokes Rabbi Chia bar Yosef and Rabbi Yochanan. But what then were Reb Chia bar Yosef and Rabbi Yochanan respectively talking about? Kan lechaltzoi, kan lehaloisai. Meaning, in this version, everybody agrees that you're not allowed to take the. I'm sorry. There's no machlokes. Rabbi Yochanan who said that you have there's no isser of. Rabbi Yochanan said that there is an iser gid hanosha even by a carbon oila. He was talking about to take the gid hanosha of the oila independently and to put it on the mizbeach. That you're not allowed to do. So even though you're not eating it, you're putting it on the mizbeach. But if it's separate from the rest of the animal, you want to go ahead and put it on the mizbeach. That's something you can't do. Lechaltzai, however, it doesn't mean that you have to remove the gid hanosha when you're putting the oil on the mizbeach. So they weren't discussing achila. Maybe achila is pashut that you're not allowed to eat it. They were both discussing putting it on the mizbeach. So first we thought in the first lashon of the Gemara that's never a problem to put it on the mizbeach. What should be the problem to put it on the mizbeach? You're not allowed to eat it. It doesn't say you're not allowed to put it on the mizbeach. Rav Papa in his second lashon said no, I'm not so sure. It could be that when Rabbi Yochanan said that there's an iser gid hanosha b'kachim she'ein nechalim by karma, it could be he meant even putting it on the mizbeach. Stating that he meant specifically if it was separate from the rest of the animal, you can't make a special halah, special haktara for that part of the oila. Reb Chia bar Yosef, when he said it's okay, he wasn't disagreeing with that. He was talking about that it's okay, meaning to not remove it from the rest of the animal. But enochinami, if it's separate, that's something that wouldn't be okay. But atzad hashava shebehen of Rav Papa's two explanations in the machlokes, Reb Chia bar Yosef, Rabbi Yochanan, is that it's not a machlokes at all. That they're not arguing. Loi pligi. What were each one respectively discussing? So you have two lashonos in the Gemara. But in both lashonos, there was no machlokes. Even though it sounds like that Meiram presented this as two opinions, it's really Elu ve'Elu Divra Lekim Chayim. There is absolutely no machlokes. Stating that, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar, no. Rav Nachman said it's not true. It's not so simple. It's very nice. Rav Papa, incidentally, throughout Shas is making Chulin. And there's a lot of Torah on this. But the point is this Rav Papa who says V'loi Pligi, who always does this. You look out for this. But at the same time,
time, he says, this doesn't work over here. Over here, it's Zichra Machloikis. And what is the Machloikis? Lahaloisai. And the way Rashi explains the Gemara, Rashi has a little bit of an arichos, but the way Rashi explains the Gemara is, the Machloikis is, do you have to remove the Gid Anasha before you put the carbon oil on the Mizbech, or do you not have to remove the Gid Anasha? Rabbi Yochanan said that the laws of Gid Anasha relate even to a carbon oil, meaning you have to remove the Gid Anasha. Whereas Rabbi Chiba Yosef said you don't have to remove the Gid Anasha. As it relates to eating it, everybody holds you not allowed to eat it. As it relates to putting the Gid Anasha on its own, on the Mizbeach, everyone holds you can't do that. The question is, do you even have to remove it? Rabbi Chiba Yosef said that you don't have to. It's not that chomer that you should have to remove it, whereas Rabbi Yochanan said, you have to remove it. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Nachman bar Yitzchak said, and I'll prove to you that there's a machlokes, the Tanya. Because, as we'll see now, there's a machlokes Tanoim, whether there's an Issa Gid Anasha by a carbon oil as it relates to putting the Gid Anasha on the Mizbech. So Rabbi Nachman bar Yitzchak essentially is going to say, this is going to be a little long-winded as well, but just for now, what Rabbi Nachman bar Yitzchak is going to say is, I found a machlokes Tanoim. So if I have a machlokes Tanoim, so it could be a machlokes Amiram as well. I mean, it's very geschmack Papa to say loy pligi, but at the end of the day, it's not a stabber. It sounds like there's two opinions, and by the way, it's a mafurish of machlokes Tanoim, as we're about to see. So to the extent that we know there's a machlokes out there amongst the Tanoim, it's very yitachin that the machlokes Rabbi Chiba Yosef Rabbi Yochanan was arguing halacha lemaisa with regards to that other machlokes Tana. So what's this machlokes Tana? The Tanya, it's a brisa. It's actually a few brises, a real kachim idea. The Hikdar HaKohen HaKol HaMizbecha. The Torah right in the beginning of Parashas Vayikra, when it discusses the carbon oil. So it says the carbon oil is different than other carbonas. Other carbonas, you have to put the chalavim, some of the chalavim on the Mizbeach, and there were 4 fats that we discussed in Eilu Trefus that are Aser Bachila, Yisur Chelev, and had to go on the Mizbeach. The rest of the animal didn't go on the Mizbeach, as opposed to the oil where it says Vehikter hakoyen es hakoyel mizbecha. And the Gemara in this brisa is medayik the word hakoyel. Hakol the rabbis saw atzomos, even the bones, v'agidim, and the sinews, v'hakranayim, the horns, v'atzofayim, and the hooves, all of it. V'hikter hakoyen es hakoyel mizbecha. But what didn't go on the Mizbeach? The skin. But other than the skin, everything went on the Mizbeach. I would think that even if one of the bones detached itself from the flesh of the oila, you should take it on its own, throw the bone into the fire. Talmud Loimad, there's another pasuk, and this is in Devarim. V'asisa oiloi secha. You should do the avoida of the carbon oil, habasar v'hadam. The basar and the dam. Oh, it sounds like only the basar and the dam. It sounds like not that atomis. Okay, basar v'dam. This pasuk, let's look at this in a vacuum. It sounds like only the basar and the dam, meaning you have to remove the gidim, you have to remove that atomis. It's tedious work. But you're going to have to do a full-fledged nikur on this animal, on this oil, before you put it on the mizbeach, because it sounds like only the basar and the dam. No, Talmud Loimad is, you have two psukim. Okay, so how do you reconcile these two psukim? They seem to blatantly contradict each other. On the one hand, the Hikdar HaKohen is rabbis, gidim atzomois, kernayim to fight. And then you have a passage that says, and the dam. So which one is it? Haketzan, Mechubarim, Yalu, Parshu, Afilu, Bereshim, Mizbeach, Yerdus. You have to say it depends. And when the gidim and that atzomois and the kernayim to fight are attached to the basar, so that's when you have the pasuk of Zenemar, the Hikdar HaKohen is hakol rabbis, those things. If, however, they're detached, then you don't. And not only don't you, but even if it's Bereshim, Mizbeach, Yerdu. What's the chiddush? Because even though there's a whole parak in Mesachtes Zvachim called Mizbeach Mekadesh, which says that if a dover puzzle the hakrava goes on the mizbech, even sha'olu lo yerdu nasu lachmish on mizbech, but that's only a dover puzzle. This is more removed from haktara, that even if it's beroish on mizbech, you don't have the halachas on mizbech mekadesh, thus yerdu, you have to remove it. Says the Gemara of Nachman bar Yitzchak's talking. So this was a brisa. Man tana d'sham b'leidam perish yerdu. Who's the tan of this mishnah? Rebbe. Why? Because there's another brisa that says the same exact thing. It also mentions a dissenting opinion. And in that brisa, we have a name to the anonymous Tana of this first brisa. What's this other brisa? A similar brisa, just a little bit more Bahar Chava. Hikdar HaKohen is the rabbis, v'atzomois, v'agidim, v'akronayim, v'tolfayim. But it says Hikdar HaKohen, it's the rabbis, those things. Afilu perish. Oh, even if they were separate. So what does that pasuk mean? You're telling me that even if those things were removed, let's say the bones were removed, still doesn't need to put it on the mizbeach. So what does it mean when it says it means something completely different. It means that, let's say, the oil was already in the fire, and then because of the heat of the fire, some of the things that were burning jumped out of the fire. It's not in the fire anymore. Do you have to be machzer it or not? It's what's known as poikin ikule basar, and we learn hakeitzad ikule basar at the machzer. V'at the machzer ikule gidim atzamis. Basar that comes out, even if it started burning a little bit, you still have to put it back in. As it relates to gidim and atzamis, k'nayim tlafayim, those things you have to put them. Even if they're detached, you still have to put it. But at the same time, if they popped out, that's where you don't have to put it back in. That's the Chachamim. And that's how the Chachamim reconcile the apparent contradiction between these two psukim. When it says Victor Akoyin and Sakoil, it means the Ikrachi of Aktara. It's going on everything. Even if it's separated, you have to put it in the fire. When it says Vasisoy L'secha Basav Adam, that's talking about if it came out. If it came out, do I have to put it back in? Oh, that's where it depends. Ikule Basar Ata Machzer, because Victor Akoyin and Sakoil. Ikule Gidim Vatsomoist I Ata Machzer, because it says Vasisa Lesecha Basav Adam. Rabbi says what we had in the previous price. So one pasuk says how do you reconcile these two psukim? If they're attached, then you put on the mizbeach. Parshu, if they were separated, I feel the mizbeach. Either way. So Rabbi in this price is the stam of the previous price, and over here we have a different shot exactly how to understand it. Says the Gemara. V'Rabbanon, why did the Rabbanon learn the way they learned? Why didn't they learn like Rabbi? Rabbi learned that when it says Hiktar Akoyin Sakilam is Beicha, it's the rabbis, the gidim, the atzomois, the kranayim tlafayim that are attached to the basar. They're included in the Chiyav Haktara. When it says it's talking about when they're detached. The Rabbanan disagree. The Rabbanan say it doesn't matter attached, detached. There's always a Chiyav Haktara. What are the two psukim then? When it says Vikta Akoyin Sakoil, it means that there's a Chiyav Haktara even when it's detached. When it says Adam, it means that if the Haktara started and now it was in a state of poikin, it jumped out, do I have to put it back in? Basar, yeah. Everything else, nah. Says the Rabbana, you know why I learned my pshat? Because I don't think you need a pasuk that if the gidim and the atzomis k'naim tlafayim are attached to the basar, that they're included in the ikar chiyav aktara. Okay, I hold it's coming the rabbis even partial. Why? Because the pasuk clearly says that the roish, the head of the oila, went in the mizbeach. Okay, what's that doing anything? It's not possible to take the gidim and the atzamis out of the rosh mizbeach. You can't do it. The rosh of the oil. You can't remove it. I mean, you can't remove it, so you see already that when it's mechuber, it goes on the mizbeach. So I know that from the rosh, because you're supposed to take the rosh intact and put it on the mizbeach. There's no way to remove everything from the rosh. Elamai must be, when it's mechuber, I know it from there. What then is Vigda Kernes Akalam is Beichel Rabbis, even if it was Parsha? Kitzur Kral Parsha. Rabbi said, no, I hear, but Mechubar in that Teira, Lo Yitzur Kral Buye, Kitzur Kral Gidanasha. You're right. From the pasuk that says that you're supposed to be makta the Rosh of the Oila, I already know the Gidim in that somewhere that on Mechubar have a din Haktara. But you know what I don't know? Gidin or atzamas, no example of atzamas, but gidim the Yisura, gidim that are really asab achila. How do I know that those gidim when that mechuber also go on the mizbeach? For that, I need the pasuk of v'hikta akoynas hakolam mizbeach l'rabbis where it's mechuber. You're right, not classic mechuber. Classic mechuber, regular gidim and atzamas that are mechuber. That I agree with you, Rabbanan. We can learn that from the Rosh Hashanah. Rabbi's tweaking his position a little bit, but what he needs this pasuk vasis of v'hikta akoynas hakoyl is the rabbis the gidanasha. Says the Gemara v'Rabbanan. What are the Rabbanon hold about Gid Anasha? Oh, Mimashki Yisrael. They hold the Gid Anasha is not going on the Mizbeach. You know why? Because it says Mimashki Yisrael. We learn from them in Amutali Yisrael. Right? This is one of the big Yisoidis in Kacha. We discussed this at length with a lot of raid in the beginning of Masachtes Menachos. So, for example, an animal that's a treifa, you can't bring as a carbon. Why not? You can't put it on the Mizbeach. Why can't you put it on the Mizbeach? You can't eat a treifa. Why can't you put an oiler that's a treifa on the Mizbeach that says Mashki Yisrael? Only something that a Yid is allowed to eat are you allowed to put on the Mizbeach. But if something a Yid is not allowed to eat, you're not allowed to put it on the Mizbeach. The point is, if you're not allowed to eat the Gid Anasha, then there's halacha mimashki Yisrael. Once there's halacha mimashki Yisrael, so it can't go on the Mizbeach. For Rabbi, what does Rabbi say? I understand there's a concept of mimashki Yisrael, but you can't tell me mimashki Yisrael is universal, and any single thing in the world that's asab achila can't go on the Mizbeach, because what are the two parts of every carbon? Forget the oil. What are the two parts of every single carbon that go on the Mizbeach? The chaylev and the dam. Right, the chaylev and the dam. The chaylev and the dam have one thing in common. They're both asur ba'achila. They both carry a chiyav kares. So you see clearly that there's carve-outs to mimashki Yisrael. So just like the chaylev and the dam, which are the parts of the animal that are naturally prohibited for a hedyot to eat, still the halacha is they are allowed to go on the mizbeach. They have to go on the mizbeach. Maybe the Gedan Nasha is going to be the same thing. What did Rabbanan say? Mitzvot and mekach shani. This is different. Chelim and dam. It says before in the Torah you have to put the chelim and dam in the mizbeach. What are you going to do? Right? Just like there's an iser eshasach, but then the Torah says yivam yavi so. So Tosfos and Yevamos Daf Gimel Amid Beis don't learn rayas from here to Asay Doicha Lois Sheish Beikaris because mitzvahs Mekachshani. That's what the Torah says. Here too, that's what the Torah says. But you can't learn anything from there, right? You can't say that. Just like the Chelev and the Dam go on the Mizbeach Hagami Mashki Yisrael. That means that any part of the animal that's naturally usher is somehow excluded from the Mashki Yisrael. No, what the Torah says before, the Torah says before. The Torah said regarding the Chelev and the Dam. The Torah did not say with regards to the Gedan. What do you see from this? What do you see from this? Machlekes Tanan. You see in the exchange between Rebbe and the Chacham, who were really arguing a real kachim, a real zvachim diga halacha, and that is when you have a carbon oil, and the Torah says viktar koines lakolam is beicha. Does it mean even the gidim in that somewhere, the kranayim and the lafayim, the part of the oil that's not bust, it's also not that, where it's detached from the oil? Do you put on the mizbeach or not? According to the chachamim, you do. According to Rebbe, you don't. There was a sub machlokes, right? Sometimes what starts off as one machlokes ends up in multiple machlokes, and just by virtue of the fact that the Tanam were often debating how to understand certain psukim, and so what started with one shaila ends up turning into many shilas. So this is a derivative of that machlokes, and that is this shaila, whether the Gedan Nasha of a carbon oil can go on the mizbeach or not. But the bottom line is, says Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, Rav Papa, you want to make shalom between Rav Chia Bar Yosef and Rabbi Yochanan and say there's really no machlokes regarding the Gedan Nasha. Honestly, it doesn't make sense, the exercise, because we know it's a machlokes. It's a machlokes Rebbe and the Chachamim. So it's a machlokes Rebbe and the Chachamim. So Zayin, it's a machlokes Rav Chia Bar Yosef and Rabbi Yochanan. Presumably, they're each taking sides in this machlokes ta'anon. The Gemara continues on this note. Amar Rabbi Huna said, "Gid anasha shel oila cholzer l'tapuach." Now, what's the halacha regarding the gid anasha the oila? So you're supposed to put it on the mizbeach. But then, before you put it in the fire, you remove the gid anasha and you put it in the tapuach. So the tapuach was the mound of ashes that were in the center of the mizbeach. They used to clean it every now and again, but that's where the gid anasha went. So the gid anasha wasn't burned together with the carbon oil, but rather it was put into the tapuach. Says the Gemara, Rav Chizah told Rav Huna, Mari dichi. Miksiv, Rashi says, Mori de Shmeitzer. That's all Mori Dichi means, right? The one who said this. Miksiv al kein lo yoichal ha-mizbeach. It doesn't say in the Torah al kein lo yoichal ha-mizbeach. What it says is al kein lo yoichlu b'nei Yisrael. Ksiv. So as a result, why? Why do you have to put it in tapuach? Why don't you burn it together with the rest of the carbon oil? Rav Huna. What did Rav Huna help? Mimashki Yisrael, and Amatul Yisrael. He held Mimashki Yisrael. Meisvei freitum, I'll ask you a kasha. Gid anosha shel shlomim mechabdei la'abma. The gid anosha of the shlomim. What did they do with that? They would sweep it. Mechabda means to sweep. It would be swept out of the Azara in the canal that took out a lot of the water and the dam that was on the floor of the Mizbeach. V'shal oila maleo. And the oila they would put on the Mizbeach. Now, the shlomim they didn't put on the Mizbeach because a shlomim, like all karbanas besides for an oila, only the fats, only specific chalava went on the Mizbeach. So there's no shaila, there's no havamina that the gidanash of the shlomim should go on the Mizbeach. So the question is though, what to do with it? Can't eat it, that's for sure. That's never been a discussion whether you can eat the gid anasha b'shlom. I mean, that's the Mishnah, right? The Mishnah says gid anasha is not even mekdashim. So of course you can't eat it. So the question is, what do you do with it? So mechabdei la'am. The oila, however, is different because by the oila all the basa went on the mizbeach. So what do you do with the gid anasha of the oila? You also put it on the mizbeach. Oh, my la maleo maktiroi. The Gemara says loy maleo v'cholza. You put it on the mizbeach and then you remove it. So if anyways removing it, it's going to end up on the tapuach. So just why put it on the mizbeach in the first place? Because it's an idea that when you makriv something, you're supposed to be makriv in a nice way. And if you would take out the gid anosha before you put it on the mizbeach, so it would defile the carbon. It would make it look like not so nice. It's actually nicer. You put the whole hindquarters of the animal in one shot on the mizbeach, and then when it's on the mizbeach, that's when you start removing it. But there's an idea of hakriveu nolafechasecha. At least put it on the mizbeach in a nicer way. Now the truth is, if the haktara of the oil is when it goes in the fire, by the time you put it in the fire, you're anyways removing it. So is this Gemara shtickle raya to major ray that we spoke about in Masechtas Vachim, that putting it on the mizbeach is already a hakrava. You see, there's an idea of hakriveu nolafechasecha by putting it on the mizbeach, right? Because if the hakrava doesn't happen until it's in the fire, it's anyways not going to be hakrifeu no lefachosecha. Just something to think about. Regardless, one final point: Tanya kavasid Rav Huna hakid anosha shel shlamim mechabdei la'ama v'shal oila. Exactly what Rav Huna said. Chaltzai l'tapuach. The bottom line is what we thought was straightforward. Rav Papa said that we weren't really sure, but the two l'shaynis. But it seemed like everybody was in agreement. What exactly you do with the gid anosha of a carbon oila? After further review, it's actually quite complicated. So you had a machlokes Rav Chia bar Yosef and Rav Yochanan. We had three ways of understanding the machlokes Rav Chia bar Yosef and Rav Yochanan. According to the first two ways, it's not even a machlokes. That was Rav Papa. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said it really is a machlokes. Then we saw this machlokes Tanoim. Machlokes Tanam, what exactly do with the Gid Anosh of an oila? And then we saw it finally, it's machlokes Rav Huna and Rav Chizda. Bottom line is that there seem to be many opinions. What does the Shaila hinge on? On the one hand, it says in the Torah, you're not allowed to eat the Gid Anosha. So the carbon oil is not eaten anyways. We're not discussing eating it. We're discussing put it on the Mizbeach. You can't eat it. Who said you can't put it on the Mizbeach? Now, it's true there's an idea of Achilas Mizbeach, but the Torah says, Akim lo yoichu b'nei Yisrael. It sounds like we're emphasizing Achilas Adam. So from that standpoint, it should be okay. But then again, there's an idea of Mimashki Yisrael. Anything that's Aser ba'achila is Aser la'krava. But then again, the chaylev and the dam are also b'achila, and it's not also b'akrava. Oh, but the Torah says in Mefurish. The Torah never said in Mefurish with regards to the Gid Anasha. Okay, so let's say you can't be makir. What do you do with it? So should I just remove it? No, you put it on the mizbeach and then remove it and then put it in the tapuach. What's the point of putting it on the mizbeach if it's anyways not going into the fire? So some of the ideas that are discussed. I mean, the big kasha that the achroinim mutsha on, and really, if we were going to speak out some raid, this is probably where the raid would be, and that is, how is it possible that there's a shaila in the Gemara of mimashki Yisrael or not mimashki Yisrael? There's always an idea of mimashki Yisrael. So the Gemara did entertain its side that maybe mida dahavi achel v'dan, but that only seemed to be one side in the Gemara. It sounds like the Gemara is entertaining a possibility, just in the shakla v'tayr and the cheshman of the Gemara, without going into it, that maybe there's no mimashki Yisrael. So just one ha'ara, the Rogach of a Goyen and the Sofnas Paneach said that according to the man that holds that ain't begidin benoisen time, that really a gid is never considered oichel. It's never considered oichel. We look at it as eitzim ba'alma. It's never considered oichel. So it could be it doesn't pass mimashki Yisrael. He said mimashki Yisrael is the pshat. You have food that's also for a yid to eat. So if a yid's not allowed to eat this food, then it's also to go on the mizbeach as well. But being that the gid hanosh is not food, according to that man the Amar, because ein begid b'noitzin time, it doesn't conform. Narvos is a chiddush haTorah that I'm not allowed to eat it. It could be the Chiddush HaTorah was only said with regards to the Isra Achila of Al-Kei La Yoichlu B'nei Yisrael, but that Chiddush of Isra Achila does not relate to putting it on the Mizbeach. And the oimik was, here's the tifkite. The tifkite is that being that it's not food, the Isra only happens when you actually eat it. We don't look at it as machalas asuras. It's not food. How could something that's not food be looked at as machalas asuras? So the Rogach of a Goyen in his Goinish Iluyish way somehow was mechadesh that gid anosh is not really machalas asuras because it's not food. So how could it be food? It's asur, but it's not meichel. So it's not machalas asuras. It's lacking in the machalos part of machalos asuras. Elamai that ma'isa chila is what's asur. But being that it's not a chefza machalos asuras, could be it doesn't relate to mimashki Yisrael. Regardless, we mentioned the tapuach, so the Gemara is going to let us exhale for a few moments before it returns to some heavy-duty Gemaras, but at least for a few moments with a little divrei agoda. Tanan hasam tapuch b'emtza mizbeach. There was a tapuch. There was a mound of ashes that was in the middle of the mizbeach. Pa'amim haya olav kisholish meis kor, and sometimes it would pile up. There was so much ashes. There was 300 kur of ashes. That's a big number. Amar Rava said guzma. It's an exaggeration. It's hyperbole. It's not real. Hishku as tamid bekoyes shalzav. There's a mishnah in Mesechtes Tamid that says that before they would check the carbon tamid, they would give it to drink. And the reason they would give it to drink is because it's easier to skin the animal if it drank before the shechita. But the Mishnah says they didn't just give it to drink. They gave it to drink from a golden goblet. Amar Rava guzma. Rashi says it's a guzma to think that they always use this kaishal. So, I mean, sometimes they did, but certainly not always. Rab Ami said, Dibra Torah Lashon Havai. You find that the Torah sometimes speaks in hyperbole. Dibra Nevi'im Lashon Havai. Dibra Chacham Lashon Havai. We just gave a few examples of it. Dibra Torah Lashon Havai. Where do you find that the Torah sometimes exaggerates, so to speak? It says, Arim Gedoyles Ubetzuras Bashamayim. This is the Meraglim are coming back from Eretz Yisrael. They're giving their report of what they saw, and they said there were cities that they were walled, they were fortified, and the walls went up to the Shamayim. Did it really go up to the Shamayim? So it's Lashon Havai. And Dibru Nevi'im, the Lashon Havai, and the Nevi'im also spoke that way, because it says, Vatibak Aretz L'Koylam. The context over there is the inauguration of Shlomo HaMelech. And it was such a big simcha, there was so much music, there was so much noise, that literally, not the windows cracked, the earth cracked. There was an earthquake from all the noise. Now, the earth didn't really crack. It's hyperbole. The 3 times where the Chachamim spoke B'Lashon Havai. Eluhei, Tapuach, Geffen uparoiches. Tapuach, we just mentioned that Geffen, the Tanan. There was a Geffen, a vine that was made of gold that was at the entranceway of the Heichal. So you're walking into the Heichal, the Beis HaMikdash, so you see this golden vineyard. That's what you saw. It was made out of gold. It was being held up by poles. And what people would do is they would donate golden grapes to this golden vine. And they would bring it, and they would hang it, they would suspend it there. There was a story of Nimna Shalish Meis Kehanim Lefnaisa. There was so much gold. These vines were so big, they needed 300 Kehanim to remove it. Says the Gemara, unfortunately, that was a gusma. It'd be nice if it was literal, but it wasn't. Says the Gemara, Paraiches, what about? I mean, there was a lot of money there, there was a lot of gold, but not that you needed 300 Kehanim to carry all the gold. What is the Lashon Havai of Paraiches? I'm going to Reb Shimon Haskan. Paraiches Oivya Tefach. The Paraiches was a Tefach thick. Al Tefach, Va'al Shivim, it was made on 72 shafts. That means something if you're a weaver. Each nima had 24 threads. It was 40 amas long. It was 20 amas wide. And there were 820,000, meaning 82 times 10,000. Do the math. 820,000 nases of other threads. They'd make 2 a year. When they had a toivelet, they needed 300 kehanim. So there's a guzma here. The Mishnah said that the laws of Gid Anasha relate both to the right thigh and to the left thigh. So the gid on the right side of the animal and the gid on the left side of the animal. Straightforward? Zaktamar, no. Masnis and the Laker of Yehuda. The Mishnah is not like Yehuda. The time we went to the Bryce of Yehuda says, that the halachas of Gid Anasha only relate to one of the 2 thighs. V'hadas machras eshel yamin. And then the Bryce continues and says that the das is machras, that it's the right one. So the Mishnah says the right and the left. Rabbi Yehuda said it's only one. Which one? Hadas machras. That's a very unclear language. That it's the right. When he said das, did he mean das Torah? Or das Baal? I mean, did he say das Torah? That meaning that even though from the pasuk it's not clear, but das Torah, I know for a fact that it's Ardimus Fukim Mesafkele. Umay das Noita. He meant he wasn't sure. Meaning, was it Mifshet Pshitale or was he Mesfuke Mesafkele? Rabbi Yehuda says the right thigh. He knows for a fact it's the right thigh, or he doesn't know for a fact that it's the right thigh. He's misopik. What's the difference? If he knows for a fact it's the right thigh, so you know for sure the right thigh is asa, you know for sure the left thigh is mutter. If he's not sure if it's the right, it's just that that's noita, but at the end of the day he's not sure, then both are going to be asa, misafik. Additionally, what happens if somebody eats one of the thighs? Is he going to get malchus or not? According to the first side, according to Rabbi Yehuda, if he eats the right one, he's going to get malchus. The left one, he's not going to get malchus. According to the second shot in Rabbi Yehuda, being that he's masafkele, even if he eats the right one, he can't get malchus because he's not really sure. If he eats both, that we'll see in the Gemara. But if he eats one, he's not really sure. Says the Gemara, Tashma, I'll bring you a right. This is a Mishnah Masechtas Pesachim. It discusses Noisar of a carbon Pesach. So we know the carbon Pesach was brought not on Pesach, it was brought Erev Pesach, Yudal Nisan. It was eaten B'leil Pesvav. It was eaten with the Seder, Al-Matzah, Sumerayim, Yachlu. That's when the carbon Pesach was eaten. The Torah says, eat it that night. If it was left over until the next day, it was Noisar. What do you do with Noisar? Beish Rifle, you have to burn. Stating that you couldn't burn it that next day. The reason you couldn't burn it that next day is the next day is Pesach. And you're not allowed to burn kachim that is possible on Pesach. So you had to wait until the following day. The following day,
dealing with Eretz Yisrael. There's one day Yontif. It's the 16th day of Nisan, right? Erev Pesach is Yudalit. The first day Pesach is Tezvav. That means the first day Cholamayid, where you could burn kachim, that's possible, is going to be b'Shisha. So the Mishnah says, Ha'atzamais v'agidim v'hanoisar yisrafu l'Shisha. When was it burnt? It was burnt on the 16th day of Nisan. But the Gemara is bothered. Why did the Mishnah single out the Atzamais and the Gidim? Now, one thing is clear. Noisar only relates to a part of the Korban Pesach that you eat. So if you have basar that is meant to be eaten and you don't eat it, so what's the halach? If it was supposed to be eaten and it wasn't eaten, the halach is then you're supposed to burn it. But at some ways, for example, let's say you have a part of the animal that was not supposed to, it had no din achila. There's no mitzvahs achilas Korban Pesach on that part of the animal. Kamuvin, there's no noiser. Noiser is what was supposed to be eaten. Now leftovers means you were supposed to eat it, now it was left over. If you couldn't eat it in the first place, or there was no mitzvah to eat it in the first place, then obviously there's not going to be any noiser. So what does the Mishnah mean when it says atzamos? So the Gemara, Mesechtes Pesachim says it's talking about atzamos that has mayach in it. The mayach shabat atzamos is the marrow that's inside the bones, which is a whole sugya in Mesechtes Pesachim. So the mayach shabat atzamos, that's obviously what it's referring to. But again, noiser would relate only to gidin that can be eaten. Gidin or parts of the animal that can be eaten. If it can't be eaten, it's excluded from noiser. So again, the Mishnah singled out Gidin. Why did it single out Gidin? It singled out Atzamos, the rabbis that Atzamos that have marrow in it are included in the laws of noiser. But why did it single out Gidin? Are we talking about Gidin that are eaten? Then eat it. Meaning, why do you have to burn it? Elamai, you're talking about gidin that were supposed to be eaten, that weren't eaten. Then it's included in noiser. What's this gidin? Ela gidei tzavra. Maybe it's talking about the gidim of the tzavra, which that's the gidin in the neck, which is, Rashi says it's koshin kat samois, and the derech is not to eat it. Then ilav basaninu. Okay, so Elamai, you're saying that it's not noiser because people don't really eat the gidin of the tzavra. Then lishdinu. Then why do you have to burn it on shishasa? Then just get rid of it. What do you do with that samois that have no mayach in it? You just, you get rid of it. So it's not noiser. So why is this included in the halacha of burning it on shishas? Rav Chizra said, I'll tell you what gidin means. It means not just any gid. It's referring to the gid ha-nasha, the famous gid. And it's going according to Rabbi Yehuda, who holds gid ha-nasha is only noyeg ba'achas. And the Gemara explains. If Rabbi Yehuda, who said that gid ha-nasha is only noyeg ba'achas, said that because he was mesopik, he wasn't sure which one it is, then I understand the Mishnah. You know what the Mishnah is saying? According to Rabbi Yehuda, you always have to burn the gidin. You always have to burn it because you can't eat it because you're not sure if one of them is the gidanosha. You're not allowed to eat the gidanosha, even if kachim. That's the beginning of the daf. You also can't go ahead and just get rid of it. Why not? Because one of the two gidanoshas is really oichel. And if it's oichel and you don't eat it, it's nicer. You have to burn it. I mean, according to the Chachamim, the gid anasha, you could just get rid of. Because being that you're not allowed to eat the gid anasha, it's not nicer. If it's not nicer, you don't have to burn it. But according to Rabbi Yehuda that holds that there's two gidin and only one of them is aser, I understand why you have to burn it. Because I'm not sure which gid is which. Thus, I can't eat any of them, but I also have to burn both of them. Because on the tzad that it's the gid hanosha, I can't eat it. And on the side that it's not the gid hanosha, I could have eaten it, should have eaten it. It's now nicer, thus I have to burn it. But if you're going to tell me that Rabbi Yehuda knew which gid hanosha's mutter is aser, he knew the right one is aser, the left one is mutter. So how did Rav Chizda help anything by saying that the Mishnah is going according to Rabbi Yehuda? According to Rabbi Yehuda, do what you're doing according to the what's Allah according to the Chum with the gid hanosha? You just get rid of the gid hanosha. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, the same thing. The right one, just get rid of, and the left one, just eat. Says the Gemara, Amrav Ikar Bar Chanina. So isn't Rav Chizda's beer in the Mishnah Mesechtes Pesachim a raya that Rabbi Yehuda wasn't spukim mesafkale, but rather Rabbi Yehuda was mifshah pshitale. So Rabbi Ikar Bar Chanina said, "Lo meimelach mifshah pshitale." Really, I'll tell you that Rabbi Yehuda was mifshah pshitale. V'chamayaskin kashukim v'sayif nesarif. It's talking about where you knew which was which, but then afterwards it was nesarif. Being that now it was nesarif, so according to Rabbi Yehuda, that's what this halacha is. I mean, you have to make it a kimt in the Mishnah. When the Mishnah says gidim yisrafu b'shisha aser, it means where they were nesarif. Being that when they're nesarif, according to the Chacham, there's no concept of nesarif. They're both
both always aser. According to Rabbi Yehuda, one is aser, one is mutter. In the event that it was nisarev, now you don't know which was the right, which was the left, so you have no choice. You're going to have to burn both. Rav Ashi said a different shot in the Mishnah. Let me do it with Rabbi Yehuda. We're talking about the shaman, the fat that surrounds the gid. The shemen of the gid is really mutter. Yisrael kedoshim nago by Yisr. Yisrael kedoshim, and they were na'ig Yisr. So being that really it's mutter, so it's for that reason you have to burn it. But being that Yisrael kedoshim nago by Yisr, so it's for that reason you can't eat it, and thus you're going to end up having to burn it. So the gidim you always have to burn. Even according to Chum, you always have to burn it. Because even though the shemen of the gid is mutter, we would noyig iser in it. If we were noyig iser, you can't eat it. You also can't dispose of it because really it's mutter b'achila. Thus it's really nicer. Therefore, you're always going to have to burn it. Ravina, similar to Rabbi Yehuda Mashmul. We're going to see this later in the Perek. Shnei gidin. There's really two gidin. Pnimi samuch le'etzem aser v'chayav and olav. Chitzin samuch lebasa aser v'en chayav and olav. There's two gidin. One gid is the real gid. The other gid is just Issa Derabanan. So as it relates to the gid that's an Issa Derabanan, that's where it's negeya. Being that it's also mutter midayraisa, so it's for that reason, in theory, you have to burn it. But being that it's something that's meaning it's mutter b'achila, thus it really is nice. So being that you're not allowed to eat it, so you can't eat it. So what's the halacha? The halacha is the gidim you're always going to have to burn. Tashma, just one final tashma. If you ate a kizayis of the right one and the left one, seifik shmeinim, you get 80 malchus. According to the chachamim, each yerech is also, it's an independent life. You get malchus for each one. Rabbi Yehuda says only 40. Yeah, if you're going to tell me that Rabbi Yehuda knew which one was also, which one is mutter, I understand why you get 40 malchus. But if you're going to tell me Rabbi Yehuda himself wasn't sure, we had this right not long ago. If Rabbi Yehuda wasn't sure which yerech is asa, which yerech is mutter, you shouldn't be able to get malchus at all for eating the. You should never get malchus for eating the gid hanasha if you eat it b'zeh. Because in order to get malchus, you have to be warned. And Rabbi Yehuda's shita is hasra safek loish ma'asra. If somebody warns you, don't do this because it might be aser, that's not called asra. Thus, there's no malchus for it. So the kasha is, if Rabbi Yehuda knows that the right one is aser and the left one is mutter, so if you eat them both b'zeh, you get 40 malchus because the right yerech, you know for sure is aser. So the hasra is vadi, it's not hasra aser. But if Rabbi Yehuda wasn't sure which one's mutter and which one is aser, so if you warn someone, don't eat these two yerechim, and you eat one and then the other one, each yerech is a suffix if it's mutter, it's aser. Thus is a suffix in the hasra. So even though you for sure ate something that's aser, there's no problem mitzad avera that you did. But the hasra is a problem. How do you know Rabbi Yehuda holds hasra suffix loish me'asra? At the time it's a brayse. Someone wasn't sure who his father was. He wasn't sure between two men. He hit both of them b'zeh chazeh. The halacha is, or kila, that cause of a kila, or he was mekala one and then the other. Or he was maka or mekala both of them at the same time. Chayiv. Rabbi Yehuda says v'asachas chayiv, b'zeh chazeh pater. V'asachas chayiv because there was a good asra, but b'zeh chazeh because you had to have a separate asra for each hakah, each klala. And Rabbi Yehuda holds that asra safik lo yishma asra. So if you see Rabbi Yehuda holds asra safik lo yishma asra, and you know Rabbi Yehuda holds that if you eat the one and then you eat the other one, you're going to get at least 40. So it must be it was mifshab shitale. Because if he wasn't sure which yerech is mutter, which yerech is aser, each one would be asra safik, and each one would be mutter, not mutter ba'achila. But there wouldn't be. So the Gemara says, "Hay tana savla ki idach tana Rabbi Yehuda." It's true there is a tana that holds Rabbi Yehuda holds asra safik lo yishma asra, but there's another Rabbi Yehuda holds asra safik shmai asra. Dam asra safik shmai. The time you went to the Brayso, the Sir Menu ad Baiker. We're talking about the Issa Noiser. You're not allowed to have Noiser, and then it says if you have Noiser, what do you do with the Noiser? You burn it. Ba kasav litan aseach lo yisasei lo yishain lo yishain Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, you know why there's an asay of Sreifas Noiser, to say there's no malchus on the lav of Noiser, to make it into a lav and itik laseh. Rabbi Yaakov says, Leimin Hashem uzeh. No, the reason there's no malchus for Noiser is not because it's a lav shein itik laseh. You don't have to come on to that say. El mishum dav lav shein b'maisa. V'chol lav shein b'maisa loikanov. It's simply because it's a lav shein b'maisa. The point is, everybody agrees in this brayso, and what we need is the fact that Rabbi Yehuda's mentioned in this brayso, that in theory there would be malchus for the Issa Noiser. What's the problem? What's the Issa Noiser? Issa Noiser, you're not allowed to leave over the food until the morning. So just picture this: it's 3:00 in the morning, and you're not eating from the bus. Somebody, two Yidden, come over to you, and they say, Rabbi Yid, you know there's an Issa Noiser. You have to eat it. I don't have to eat it. I have 4 hours until Alois HaShachar. I don't have to eat it yet. So the Hasra is always going to be Hasra Safik. Being that it's always going to be Hasra Safik, and Rabbi Yehuda says that there's no malchus. Why? because the lav shenit klasei. So you see, mitzad the hasra, there would have been malchus. I hasra safik must be Rabbi Yehuda's hasra safik shmei hasra. Didn't we just say Rabbi Yehuda says that if somebody warns somebody, he says don't hit him, and he hits him, and then he hits the next person, bezeh chazeh, being that he doesn't know which one is his father. Hasra safik lo shmei hasra must be it's machlekes tano, but that Rabbi Yehuda's hasra safik shmei hasra lo shmei hasra. Coming, just tying it all together, maybe really Rabbi Yehuda holds that he wasn't sure, Mesafkele, whether it's the right Yerech or the left Yerech as it relates to the Gid Anasha. If he was Mesafkele, how could Rabbi Yehuda have said that if you eat the right and then you eat the left, you're going to get at the very least Arba'im? L'chayra, there was no Asra. Isn't it Asra? Safik, the teretz is, this Bryce is going according to the Manama that holds, that Rabbi Yehuda holds Asra, Safik, Shmai Asra. But Enechinab, if you hold that Rabbi Yehuda holds Asra, Safik, Lo Shmai Asra, then in this case, there won't be any Malchus at all, not even Malchus Arba'im, because Rabbi Yehuda maybe wasn't Mifsha Pshitale, he was Sefuke Misafkele. Either way, so we conclude, at the very least, we can breathe a little bit with some of these difficult Gemaras, and in the next few days, we're going to get into some Divrei Agada, try to understand the Issa Gid Anasha a little bit, and the context of the Gid Anasha, which is Parshas Vayishlach, so some nice dafin coming.